What do you do as an analyst when the politicians, the favorites of the people, the particular characters people want to hear about, are not making any news? They're not making any moves. They're being caught napping by another politician who is all over the place, always capturing the news, controlling the narrative. What do you do? Because you don't want to reach that place where you'll be labeled a supporter of that particular politician who remains visible all the time, who always seems to be one step ahead of the other pretenders to the throne, the other prominent people in the opposition who are seeking to unseat Ruto from the presidency in 2027. Well, if you're the Kumekucha Chris channel, you ignore all that and you just report and analyze the reality on the ground. If Gachagua is prominent, if Gachagua is making waves, if Rigathi Gachagua is doing things which are making an impact in Kenyan politics, you just keep on analyzing Gachagua. And you wear a crash helmet and wait for the criticism and wait for the labeling. Well, actually there is a very major development that has unfolded over the last few days. Rigathi Gachagua has launched his bid for the presidency of the Republic of Kenya. Hey. And he hit the ground running. From Nyeri, where he made this big announcement. He stopped over at a place called Githurai. And everybody seems to be talking about this Githurai rally. Gachagua was on fire. But meanwhile, another very popular opposition candidate, the leader of the Tawe movement, the fast, rapidly growing Tawe movement within the Mulembe nation, George Natembea, seems to be positioning himself to block Rigathi Gachagua from ever being the choice of the opposition as the united candidate to face Ruto. Now, there are many Kenyans who are very worried about this because it means the opposition will be divided. And according to these Kenyans, this will be a huge advantage to William Samoei Ruto. I don't agree, but that's what most Kenyans believe, and I have to respect that. Karibu sana to my show, where we break all that down and more, so that by the end of the show today, you are much better informed of what is really going on in the motherland. Twende kazi. How did Rigathi Gachagua transform himself from the kingmaker par excellence into a presidential candidate for 2027? Will it work? With all the backlash and hatred towards the House of Mumbi, will it really work? Will it give an advantage to Ruto? Because now it is clear that a united opposition against Ruto may not be very easy to achieve. Actually, unless something different happens going forward, it seems that will not happen. We will end up with at least one or two major candidates vying on their own from the presidency, away from the united opposition. What does this mean? Does it really mean that Ruto will sneak his way back into power? Those are the questions burning on the minds of many Kenyans, and we're going to tackle those questions head on. Actually, the truth is, there is some very good news. In all this chaos and worrying developments, there is a catch, which is very good news for long-suffering Kenyans. So stay with me and find out exactly what it's all about. But very quickly before we proceed, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for today's video. Lemifi. Now I'm sure you're aware of all the huge advantages you'd have using Lemifi. You can send money to Kenya at the best rates and with zero fees. You can send without funding the wallet. You can send from a pay bill or a till. You can also receive money from Kenya, this time not sending money to Kenya. You can also receive money from Kenya at zero fees. And of course, Lemifi has very competitive rates. And of course, you can still use my code, Kumekucha, which you see on your screens right now. And you'll be able to get an instant cashback. Yeah? If you're sending your first 50 pounds in the UK, you'll be able to get a cashback of 10 pounds. If you're using euros and you send at least 50 euros, you'll be able to get a cashback of 15 euros. And if you're in the US, for sending your first $100, you'll get a cashback of $20. I highly recommend that you try Lemifi today, because they are big supporters of this channel, and that will be another way of supporting what we do here on this channel. Right, let's answer those burning questions. I listened to Rigathi Gachagua's speech in Githurai. It was fire. Hey. And as I keenly listened to what he was saying, hitting out at Ruto, criticizing Ruto, barring Ruto politically, I started asking myself, am I hearing right? Am I? Because we all are aware that some youngsters lost their lives. Some youngsters were abducted. They have never been seen to date, for saying things less controversial than what Gachagua was saying at Githurai. And it gets even more interesting and puzzling. President Ruto has hit back at Gachagua. Yeah, he has said at one point that Gachagua has no education, and that is why he was not effective as his deputy. But Gachagua has much more convincingly hit back, yeah, by pointing to the reign of President Kibaki and reminding Kenyans that despite President Kibaki's illustrious educational background and exposure, he never even one day opened his mouth to praise himself in front of Kenyans. Bottom line, do you know what this looks like? It looks like the government is fighting a losing war against Gachagua. Now, how is that even possible? The government, with all its state machinery, with all its power, with all its many options in front of it, including waving files, seems to have been cornered by the former deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, because he's moving across the country, saying what he wants to say, which is mostly hitting very hard at President William Samoei Ruto. It is more than fascinating that history is repeating itself. You remember the way Ruto was going around the country when he was deputy president, hitting out at President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. Remember that? But I must add that this time round, Gachagua is hitting much harder. Much harder. One term, that rallying call seems to have taken Kenyans by storm and clearly is unstoppable. The government of William Samoei Ruto has no answer for Rigathi Gachagua. No answer at all. They seem to have no strategy, no idea on how they're going to deal with Rigathi Gachagua. Now, some very speculative analysts have brought forward a theory that actually Gachagua is working for Ruto. Now, there are many reasons why that is laughable, yeah, but I think the most important one is look at what Gachagua is doing. What is it doing to Ruto? Because when you're working for somebody, you don't do your work in such a way that you finish your boss. Hiyo umesikia wapi jamani? It doesn't work like that. And remember, we're in the year 2025. Elections are scheduled in the 8th month of the year 2027. If things continue the way they are, clearly presidential candidate Ruto will completely be stripped of any ounce of credibility in an election campaign. Yeah, I know already things are very bad for him. But as Gachagua continues with his one-term campaign, can you imagine what that is going to do to Ruto by the time 2027 and the elections arrive? He'll be finished. Although I'm certain that Ruto handlers are very happy, because the chances of getting a united opposition now look very slim. And it seems that Gachagua's main opponent, the person who doesn't want to hear that Gachagua is the opposition choice to face Ruto, is a man called George Natembeya, the governor for Trans Nzoia. And it gets even more complicated because one of the closest allies to Rigathi Gachagua is also from the Mulembe Nation. Yeah? His name is Malala, Cleophas Malala, who at that Githurai rally, which was very late, revealed the Gachagua strategy for the presidency. Malala told Githurai Kenyans that removing Ruto will not be easy. That to remove Ruto, you need a rough, experienced, strong character like Rigathi Gachagua. Otherwise, if you choose a weak candidate, to face Ruto on behalf of the opposition, then it is very possible that Ruto will use his tricks and get back into power. Now, that narrative is bound to catch on very quickly, because Kenyans have not forgotten how Ruto became president. They have not forgotten. They know the funny, dodgy things which happened so that Ruto was declared president. And therefore it makes a lot of sense that Rigathi Gachagua was there with him and maybe even participated in a lot of those dodgy, funny things that made Ruto president. And so because Gachagua knows where all the traps are hidden, he definitely understands the strategy Ruto used, to fox his way into the presidency. It would stand to reason to have Gachagua deal with Ruto, because the burning desire amongst all Kenyans is for Ruto to go. Okay, that should be clear. Now, admittedly, when you look at all this, it looks like all is lost for the opposition. However, that is not true. This is politics. And one of the key things that has come out about presidential politics, a very important key lesson that history has taught us over and over again, is the simple fact that it is not a good idea for a presidential candidate to announce his intentions too early. In fact, successful candidates in the past have announced their intentions at the very last minute. Maybe the best example to illustrate this is what happened in 2002. In 2002, Moi was very confident. He was overconfident. And his confidence was mainly from the conclusion that there was no way the opposition were going to sit down and agree on one candidate to face Moi's candidate for the presidency in those 2002 elections. And in a way, Moi was not wrong. In fact, he was right. It is just that things happened, circumstances conspired, Raila seized the opportunity at Uhuru Park and said Kibaki tosha, and put all the other opposition leaders in an impossible situation where they could not object. And so the candidate was Kibaki. But for our purposes today, the biggest mistake Moi made in those elections, because Kanu would easily have won them, the biggest mistake he made is that he announced his candidate before the opposition announced theirs. He must have been so confident he felt it didn't matter, but it ended up mattering terribly, because Raila's choice of Kibaki was mainly because Moi's candidate was Uhuru. Bottom line, the timing of an announcement of a presidential candidature is critical. This is politics. When you announce that you're vying for the presidency and you start your campaign 3 years ahead of time, especially going to the kind of election we're going, Of course, we know Ruto started campaigning early, but his situation was different. He was already within the system. He was already a deputy. He was sabotaging that government while he was still within it. Yeah, because he had access to government. He had access to government offices. He had access to so many things. Of course, which also enabled him to win those elections, win in quotes, very mysteriously. So his case is special, cannot be compared to others. Announcing your candidature too early, even as a member of parliament, gives all your opponents time to plot and plan your downfall. And although Gachagua has the huge advantage of numbers, which is very obvious, it was not a good idea. It is not a good idea in my opinion, for him to be coming out this early and announcing his intentions so loudly and so clearly to everybody, including his opponents or would-be opponents. Now, the good news for long-suffering Kenyans is that it is still too early. In politics, a week is a very long time. And therefore, a month is what? A month is more than a lifetime. And then many months, you can't even imagine. Mambo bado. There are still so many issues on the table. There are still so many bridges to cross before we reach that place where Kenyans have to prepare for a presidential election. And therefore, in my humble opinion, there is no need to panic, okay, over these developments. More so because of the hand-to-hand things happening behind the scenes, yeah, which I discuss in full in my very latest weekly intelligence briefings number 127, yeah, which should be out in a few hours. If you're a subscriber, look out for it in your inbox. In the next 6 or 7 hours, it'll be there. And I'm sure you'll find it very interesting. Now, in case you're not yet a subscriber to the weekly intelligence briefings, you can see the rates for that on your screens right now. But even better, if you're in a position, you can get the golden key or the golden pass for only Kenya shillings 6,333. And then you'll be able to get all WABs, all highly sensitive special reports, and there's one due very soon. Yeah? You'll be able to get all those without ever worrying about payment again. You can see details in front of your screens right now on what you need to do. Please take action. This is a very special offer for this golden pass. It is ending very, very soon. So I strongly advise you take full advantage before it concludes and you find yourself in that unfortunate situation where you've been locked out. Okay, so please hurry. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.